What's going on? My name's Cali. I'm the okayest engineer, and today we are going to make the first of a few videos in a series where we're building a brand new carbon fiber seat for my helicopter. Well, it's time to build a new carbon fiber seat. The last one just happened to be a little too wide and a little too reclined to fit properly in the helicopter. So I took what I learned from that one, I jumped back into Onshape and adjusted the model to something that I think will fit better this time. From there, I ran the model through CAD/CAM software to generate the G-code that my CNC router will use to machine the two parts of the plug for that seat. For the material, I'm doing the exact same as I did last time. We're going to use 2-inch Pink Panther insulation foam that happens to be polystyrene. Those were cut up into smaller sections that were roughly the same size as the plug, and then they were glued together with Gorilla Glue, which is expanding and fills out all the gaps that are uneven between those sheets and does a really good job at holding it all together. To secure the foam to the CNC router, it's just as simple as using a few pieces of double-sided sticky tape. This has actually worked really well for me the last few times. It holds the material pretty good, and the tool loading is so low that there's almost no forces, not to mention if it throws some foam across the room, it's not the end of the world. I'm not sure how, but I completely forgot that my gantry is just under 6 inches tall, and obviously this is 3 stacks of 2-inch foam and it doesn't fit. So the same thing I did last time, I had to write a quick little program that I can face all the foam from back to front so that the foam will actually fit under the gantry. Fortunately for me, the top surface isn't actually important for the seat, and so it doesn't really matter where that Z height is, so I will be perfectly fine. But I don't know how you forget something that was so annoying in the first place. Well, this thing turned out, I guess, pretty okayest. I made one mistake, and when I was machining the bottom piece, the roughing bit, or the 1/2 inch bit, was actually a little bit too low. And when I put in the ball end, it didn't actually penetrate far enough into the butt plug to actually get rid of these lines. And so I could have run it again, but I also almost ran the bit into the table. And at the end of the day, it's actually not that big of a deal. I'm going to completely cover this and we'll throw some Bondo on it and all of that will go away. So the next thing I need to do now is to actually attach the back piece to the bottom piece. These extra side pieces that are extra material, I need to cut those off and make them just nice and flat. Well, unfortunately, we haven't made it very far, and in true Cali fashion, I've already made a mistake. So I used Gorilla Glue for this joint, and as you saw, I pinned it with some toothpicks, thinking that that was probably good enough, and the joint completely expanded and separated the two pieces, and I don't like it. The last time I did this, I have some foam tack glue, which worked perfect. And why I didn't just use it again, I don't really know. So now I'm going to cut this back apart, try to sand those faces back flat again, and then I'll use the foam tack, which doesn't actually expand and should hold the two pieces together. So just frustrating. Oh well, we'll get over it. Well, that did not exactly go as planned. My precision cut was anything but precise. Oh, shit. It ended up taking out some foam, which I then had to sand out. That'll do, pig. That'll do. The glue that I actually used was old, and I don't actually think it's going to work very well. So we resorted back to hot glue and just loaded this sucker up on the back side, and it should be good enough, I hope. It really only has to hold long enough to get the fiberglass on, and so I'm not really worried about it. I also added these 2 extra blocks up front, so an extra 4 inches. That's to get my flange down the front face. I wasn't able to put that into the actual CNC program because the limited height that I had on the gantry. So that'll make up for that. I'm going to shape it up now and just sand it all nice and smooth, get rid of these tool lines, and yeah, get it ready. All right, now that we have the plug glued together and sand down, I want to go over a couple things. One, the material that we're going to be using to make this, and two, the design of the actual plug. So with the plug, you want to make sure that you have a nice amount of area around the exterior or rim of your part. I didn't have enough on the last seat mold, and it ended up causing me a whole bunch of problems. General rule of thumb is about 5 inches. The more, the merrier. This will leave plenty of room for your carbon to kind of overlap and extend off for your trimming. It'll allow you room to put your flow media in and your vacuum bag. You're just going to thank yourself if you leave yourself a bunch of extra room. So that's the reason that this mold is so big. 2 is material choice. So for this, the foam we're using is polystyrene. There is 2 different types of resins or epoxies that you can use. They're either poly or ester based resins, and then there's epoxy based resins. If you use a polyester resin on polystyrene, it will melt it completely, and you'll end up with all sorts of disasters. Also, acetone likes to eat this stuff too. So you cannot use a polyester-based resin when putting a layer over the surface of your plug to make it stronger. There are other materials, other foams that are compatible with polyester resins. They're just harder to find, a little more expensive, and this stuff you can get from Home Depot, which is why I chose it. So we'll be using epoxy-based resin to cover the mold. In this case, we're using Fiberglass brand new release laminating epoxy resin. This stuff is super cool. It's a lot more stable across temperatures, so you won't get the crystallization that happens with some of their other resins. You actually gain performance. So this will cure at room temperature with all 3 of their hardeners. They're slow, medium, and fast. It's more clear than their other epoxies, and you'll actually get a higher usable temperature to about 220 to 240 F with no post cure, so straight off the rip. So that's super cool. I'm excited to test this stuff out, and that will make a perfect material to apply to this plug. Now, as far as the plug's concerned, you can do 2 things. One, you can just glass it over with this epoxy resin. That'll protect anything that you put on top of it into getting into the foam. I'm going to go one step further, and I'm going to add a layer of fiberglass cloth. I may even do 2. In some of the previous projects I've done, it's left it a little thin, and I've sanded through, which caused all sorts of other nightmares. So as long as you can protect yourself from that foam, you will be okay, and 2 layers will do that for me. The fiberglass cloth and the epoxy resin is down and fully cured. About 12 hours later, I came in just to see, and I started sanding some things. It was still a little bit soft, so I let it cure for another 24 hours, and it's actually sanding down really nicely now. I did use intentionally a lot of epoxy, and while I set it up in this position, it actually ran down and pooled in this lower location. So there's some extra epoxy down here that I'm going to have to work to get out. I'm going to sand just the high spots. So learning from my mistakes the last time, I do not want to burn through the fiberglass cloth. That'll give access for the polyester primer to get into the foam. And just like that, it's all keyed up and all the high spots are down. Now, from this point forward, as I add more material like that fairing compound and the high build primer, anytime I'm sanding down and I start to break through and touch this surface, I'm going to immediately stop and then we'll add more filler. The last time, I basically used this material as filler, and that's why it got thin in locations and ended up being just a nightmare. I did break through in a couple spots. There were some bubbles, and I had kind of a thought. Instead of waiting 24 hours for the epoxy resin to cure, I'm just going to go get some 5-minute epoxy and fill in these holes and seal up that foam underneath. Now that I have the holes repaired and all the high spots sanded down, I came back and used a generous amount of acetone to clean the entire surface. That also ensured that this whole thing is sealed off and nothing seeped into the foam underneath. So this is Fiberglass 4118 fairing compound. It's epoxy based. You thoroughly mix the hardener and the resin 1-to-1, lay it on super thick, wait about 16 hours, and then sand it all back down. I'll use that fairing compound to come back and fill in these lower spots and these valleys. I plan to only do this once. I hope I don't eat my words, but once again, this is just to do a rough pass and get most of the lows out, and then the final stuff will be done with the high build primer. All right, I got the epoxy fairing compound completely sanded down. I was very careful not to actually go too deep into that lower layer of fiberglass. You can tell that the fairing compound is only left in those deep valleys. Once again, you just want to fill those in. The rest and the heavy lifting will be done by the high build primer, which we're going to do next. This Duratec high build primer is a polyester primer. Cali from the future here. I was doing some cleaning up and I went and grabbed the mixing stick that I used to mix the high build primer, and you can see just how aggressive this stuff is to the polystyrene foam underneath. Just brutal. Typically polyesters don't like to play well with epoxies, but in this case this is good. I checked. You just have to make sure your epoxy is fully cured, and you want to make sure you roughen up that surface so that you get a good mechanical bond between the two, because you will not get any form of chemical bond. The Duratec primer calls for a 40 to 100 grit surface prep. We used 80, so we're good to go there. We're going to be kicking this off at 2% with MEKP. The gun we'll be using is just an Amazon cheap $15 gun. We're going to set the compressor regulator to about 80. This will be set to about 30. We're using a 2mm tip, and the plan is to just lay down some really thick, nice, clean primer. The data sheet calls for a thin initial layer, and then you're supposed to let that flash off for about 2 minutes, followed up with about 2 or 3 nice wet coats on top of that. Well, honestly, I kind of surprised myself on this one. It turned out way better than I was expecting. I obviously didn't spend too much time around the outside. That's why it looks a little bit worse out there. But the actual seat, that is clutch. I really like how that turned out. From here on out, I will only be using a piece of foam with sanding paper to sand this down. I'm no longer trying to, I don't know, match what the machining was. I'm purely trying to make sure that everything is as smooth as possible and there's no real weird transition. So a foam block should be able to get me there. I was using 80 grit for all of the fairing compound. We're going to reduce down to 120, get this all flattened out. This should tell me kind of where things are high and low, and basically tell me if I'm going to need another coat or not. So we'll get into that, and we'll see where we're at in about, I don't know, 20 minutes. I'm not sure if this is how it's supposed to go, or if I just got lucky, or maybe it's the fiberglass material, but either way, when you can knock down the orange peel and you end up with basically a perfect mold first try, I mean, it's off to a good start. So the only spot I sanded through was down here at the base. Everywhere else, I mean, it went pretty much perfect. Usually there's some low spots that you got to work to get out. But in this case, the seat of the mold is like perfect. All right, she's all sanded down, ready for the final, what I think will be the final coat of primer. In comparison over here, this is what I expected the whole thing to look like, where it was a mixture of highs and lows and just a big disaster. That's usually what takes a handful of times to actually clean up and make it look really nice the way this is. Even then, I'm surprised over here where I had some bigger overlaps and some nice runs and stuff. I mean, it all came out looking way better than I thought. So I'm not sure if that's just because I put more high build primer down than I previously do. Before I use an epoxy high build, this is a polyurethane high build. Either way, I really like this stuff. It dries quick, it sands down easily, it builds on thick. I mean, I'm sold. I love this stuff. I'm going to use this definitely on everything that I do going forward. Well, I did all the wet sanding off camera because it's about as interesting as watching paint dry, but I freaking love this high build primer. It is so good compared, I mean, I have two data points. I have the stuff I used before and I have this stuff, but this stuff is so good to work with. It lays down really nice. It sands really, really well. It gives a really nice finish. I took the outer flanges down to like 800, and then I did the seat to 1,000. I don't really plan on going much further. A couple reasons. I'm going to touch up the actual mold once it comes off. So I'll polish the actual gel coat on the mold. And then two, when I pull the carbon seat out of the mold, this seat will actually be exposed to sunlight. It sits in an open door helicopter, and so you have to protect the resin specifically from the UV rays. So to do that, you got to throw down a clear UV protectant over the surface. To get that to adhere to the carbon part, you have to scuff the part up, so it makes no sense to start with a perfect mirror finish on your mold if you're just going to scuff it all up when you're done. The last thing to do with this plug is to throw down 6 layers of Partol paste mold release, and I won't bore you with that either. You literally just throw it down and buff it off. So we're going to call it here. The next video, we'll actually start making the mold. Huge shout out to Fiberglass. Without them, none of this would be possible. I'm going to link all of the products that I used in the description below. It actually worked this time, so I would strongly suggest following along and using those. As always, go build something cool, never stop learning, and we'll see you on the next one.